Hello, welcome back to another edition of Road Talk with Cade. Today is Friday, February 14th, 2025. In this episode, I want to share with you some architectural history of Asheville. The town of Asheville is a place I never planned on living. The original plan was to move to Raleigh, North Carolina, the state capital. When interviewing for my current position, I was asked if I would like to move to Asheville. I agreed blindly, not knowing much about the town, as I had never been there. As an untrained and casual fan of architecture, I was very fortunate to have ended up here. The town is filled with all sorts of unique buildings that allow you to travel through history as you walk down the street. The sector of architecture that I am most fascinated with is the Victorian style that dominated the United States during the 1800s and the early portion of the 1900s. These old buildings, built by generations past, cover all my favorite architecture styles. Whether it is my personal favorite Italianate style that was most common in my home state of Wisconsin during that time, or other beautiful styles of Gothic Revival, Romanesque Revival, Stick style, Greek Revival, or any of the other amazing styles that were common during that stretch of time. To me, I think that is when America hit its architectural peak, a thing we have long since lost 125 plus years further into history. Lots of factors play into that loss of beauty that once skilled workers left as their story to share with me, even though I will never know their names. It is their gift that the generation has left for us to enjoy. So zooming back into the small town of Asheville, how did it all get here? In the year 1880, Asheville had a population of 2,600 people. Over the next 50 years, the population boomed to over 50,000 in the year 1930, almost doubling in size during the Roaring Twenties. With the consistent and then drastic growth of city population, that meant a lot of money and skilled labor was flooding into the mountain town. In 1895, George Washington Vanderbilt's Biltmore House was completed, just down the road. The massive project created a large population of skilled labor surrounding the town of Asheville. So with one beautiful project completed, what came next is one of the major reasons for all the beautiful buildings you still have and will find around Asheville today. These now skilled laborers were freed up to start their own businesses, create government buildings, and build beautiful structures for all the other rich folk that wanted their own piece of the mountain town. This continued over the next 34 years, as that generation continued to mature in their skills. This all came crashing down in the year 1929, when the stock market crashed, stopping the world in its tracks. The stock market crash was so bad, it decimated the economy of the entire country and the world with it. What it did for Asheville might be one of the only positive things to come out of the whole mess. While the population still suffered, it left the architectural beauty, frozen in time, to be able to bless my eyes almost 100 years later. So with that historical background, let's get into some of my favorite buildings that are around town, excluding the Biltmore, because that itself deserves its own video someday. I also plan to do videos on the homes and churches around town one day, so that will be excluded from the video as well. Don't worry, there are still tons of amazing buildings that we will get to experience throughout the rest of the video. So let's get into some of my favorites. Starting with the Jackson Building downtown. The Neo-Gothic skyscraper was the first skyscraper in western North Carolina, being completed in 1924. Sitting on the corner of Pack Square downtown, the 140-foot tall building creates a beautiful skyline when paired with the City Hall and Buncombe County Courthouse that sit at the east end of the square. On top of the building sits an observation tower, creating a beautiful crown for the top of the building. That observation tower was also for a time used by an inspector to monitor smoke from chimneys around town, to quickly be able to alert the fire department. Lastly, I would like to point out the grotesques on the building, as any building that is fitted with grotesques instantly makes it better. If you look to the left of the Jackson Building, the shorter tower that helps to support the building is the West Hall building that was constructed by the same developer. Now the second building I want to mention is the Art Deco style City Hall. The original City Hall sat in the park where I shot the footage of the Jackson Building from. The previous City Hall that I show you here was only in service for 34 years. Fitted with a firehouse behind the three arches on its left, and the unique shaped bell tower. Due to the size and growth of the city, they demolished that one to create this masterpiece. Being built from 1926 to 1928, the architect took inspiration from the surrounding mountains to create the top of the building. The extremely unique shaped building, with its pink zergite roof, accented with green and gold feathered motifs, make it instantly recognizable. The architect Douglas Ellington chose those colors as accents to the natural colors of the soil and trees of the surrounding areas. The town takes so much pride in the building that it has been planted as the main focus of the city's flag, as well as a bunch of murals from around town. Continuing in the downtown area, I would like to highlight the Grove Park Arcade, matching with the neo-Gothic style of the Jackson Building. As we enter the arcade, I want to point out that it extends an entire city block. The arcade was constructed from 1926 to 1929, predating the modern concept of a mall. On the inside of the building, you can see where the architect used terracotta tiles to soften the look of the walls, almost giving it a castle-like look, creating a more detailed structure that helps it stand alone amongst the many marvels around town. The real beauty, however, is on the inside of the mall. As we walk through the two-story shopping center, you can see it's filled with restaurants, shops, and now retrofitted with 42 apartments. Take note of the glass-paned roof that fills the entire building with natural light during the hours of the day, with the central feature being multiple cast-iron spiral staircases that when walking on will instantly transport you back in time. Unfortunately, the staircases were closed today because of an event being held in the building. The Grove Park Arcade is a building that was well ahead of its time, but laid the foundation of what today is known as a mall. The last building that I want to share with you downtown is the second Battery Park Hotel. This building sits at the north end of the Grove Park Arcade. It now functions as an assisted living center for old folks. The original Battery Park Hotel was also built downtown, but sat a little higher on the hill than the one we see today. Sadly, the Queen Anne style hotel that you are looking at a picture of was torn down in 1922. There is still a lot of speculation on what happened as to the actual reason for the destruction of the masterpiece. Some claim it was because of a fire, some claim it was just because of insurance fraud, but also they just say that it was old and outdated and it was no longer the best hotel in town, so there was time for them to tear it down and upgrade. Nobody has a clear answer, and everybody's dead that was there back then, so we'll never know. Now you look at the current Battery Park Hotel, which was completed in 1924. Both Battery Park hotels were used to host the elites that would come into the town to enjoy the fresh mountain air, leaving the hustle and bustle of cities like New York and Philadelphia behind for a more relaxed way of life during the summer months. The 14-story tall red brick building is built in the classic revival style. It, as well as the original, has lots of speculation around the building, as multiple deaths have occurred in the hotel over the years, with one so prominent that there is even a book written about the incident. I could spend another hour, or maybe even two, showing you around all the beautiful pieces of architecture lining the streets of downtown Asheville. There are parts of downtown where we could go building for building down full city blocks. Buildings like the S&W Cafeteria, the Wachovia Bank and Trust Building, the Miles Building, and the Crest Building all deserve their own parts, but I just don't have the time to share them all with you guys. We are in a time crunch here, so for now, I'm going to branch out to other parts of the city that deserve their own spot in this video. Starting with one of the most unique buildings I think I have ever laid my own two eyes on. The Grove Park Inn is a resort on the north side of Asheville. Moving away from my preferred style of architecture, this resort is built in the free-flowing style of arts and crafts architecture. Edwin Wiley Grove, who also built the arcade and hotel that we just spoke about, bought the land to build a grand hotel. His son-in-law, with no formal architecture experience, sketched out the unique structure. Then 4 years after purchasing the land, in 1913, the stone structure was completed and is now a proud representative of the historical members of Hotel's program. The hotel has been visited by 10 U.S. presidents throughout its tenure. Sadly, the resort has expanded on to make the hotel larger, but failing to keep the same architectural design of the original structure, but ignore that part. Focus on the piece of beauty that was originally placed here, with its grand lobby heated by 2 gigantic fireplaces on each side. Focus on the detail of every stone, so that every windowsill fits into the uneven stone surrounding it. The last place I'll be taking you this episode is the Biltmore Village. Before we get into this part of the episode, I want to make note that this area of town was one of the most hard hit by Hurricane Helene. Over 4 months later, many of these buildings still sit empty, windows boarded up with plywood, or taped off with "Do Not Enter" signs. The now suffering village sits at the entrance to the Biltmore House. The buildings in this part of town were modeled after an old-timey English countryside village. The buildings for the most part all match, with rough pebbled dash, red brick, steep pitched roofs, and multiple gables to finish off all the finely detailed buildings. In the couple block stretch south of downtown. The designer of many of these buildings is Richard Sharp Smith, who was an assistant to Richard Morris Hunt, the head architect of the Biltmore that came before the village. The area was originally used as a company town for estate workers who worked on the Biltmore property. It is now highlighted by the Bohemian Hotel, as well as being lined with tons of shops and restaurants to fuel the tourism that dominates the town. For now, this will conclude my first episode on the amazing amount of architecture that sits in the Appalachian Hills in and around the town of Asheville. Before we end this episode, I want to touch on where my fascination of architecture comes from. To me, architecture is a statement of the health of a society. Architecture is a branch of art that is embedded into our functioning day-to-day lives. Most people walk down the street every day, not taking time to think about every brick on a building and why it was placed there. All of those bricks tell the story of one, the people who constructed the building. I have a long-running belief that every generation leaves behind part of their story, with the care to what they put into their work. 2, more broadly, the health of a society that the buildings sit in. For example, brutalist architecture was one of the most popular during the Cold War in the United States, because as a society, for 30 years, everybody was fearing of nuclear war. The buildings still resemble that today, with their drab, mostly concrete facades. 3, my favorite, the detail in how much people cared to create something that would stand the test of time. We as a society rarely ever create anything beautiful anymore. We are more focused on being cost efficient, which has eliminated the artistic work that used to make architecture great. If I could go back and do it all over again, at the age of 16, I would have pushed myself to go to a school of architecture. Sadly, I only get one life, having to live with my former decisions, and will have to pursue it as a hobby for now. I still hope to influence others in the idea that we need to return to making beautiful buildings again. Beautiful buildings lead to a beautiful society. A beautiful society is one that I want to live in. As always, thank you for listening. I love you. Bye.